kind words and the introduction. Thank you all for attending today and the opportunity for me to share some of my initial thoughts. It is the first formal presentation that I'm giving, and so what I would ask is that if you can respect the confidence of that today. I'm really looking to hear as much as I can from you to start to form some thinking around the direction. But I'll share with you our current approach through this presentation. Now, many of you don't know me and may not realise that I have been quite involved in the aged care and disability sectors for quite a number of years. Now, this has both been at a very personal level and it's also been in having a deep interest in understanding the social issues affecting ageing and the way in which we, if you like, build a system and an economy that can support it better. And that's really why I got involved, is an interest in understanding how we address what is going to become an ever-increasing challenge. For me, for some time, as I've been taking that interest, I've become more and more concerned about the way in which society broadly, and I've looked across 5 major markets, having come from global roles in the past, informing my views, is the way that society treats ageing as a problem and almost as a sign of weakness and something that we shouldn't be looking forward to. I know that's not true of all, but in general, that is the picture that I'm picking up. In my own research, what I found is that when older people are with their families, they're backseated. They're allowing the new generations to fly. But when they're with their own cohort, it's as it always was. The same crack, the same desire to be meaningful and purposeful, but probably with more fear being built in about whether or not that purpose can be realised and some of the other challenges that they may face. And I'm hoping that the Taskforce can help to address these fundamental issues and shape an industry vision that helps people see ageing as a chance to explore more, to live better and feel a sense of worth and dignity, and bring more definition to that word dignity. We want the ageing to be inspired and equipped, not helpless and confused, and I see that as a fundamental premise that we need to work with within our Taskforce. Being part of the aged care sector is quite a humbling experience, and not one that you're prepared for until you get into it, to realise the very human issues that people have to face on a day-to-day basis. It's the one industry where things don't always get better, and ultimately our workforce has to recognise and deal with end-of-life issues that you don't have to deal with in other industries. As I reflect upon it at a very human level and had quite variable experiences of my own, what I realise is that everybody is trying to do the best they can for the people they care about and for the people that they're charged with caring for. And it's really at that human level. It's about human beings trying to help other human beings solve a problem at a time of need. And that's why we're here. That's why we are in this industry. It's the role of the Taskforce to help navigate these challenges, and in doing that, to work closely with you in shaping and building an industry workforce strategy for the aged care sector. Now, our report will be delivered on the 30th of June 2018, and what we're intending there is to deliver a strategy with a clear line of sight to practical implementation. So as you can appreciate, there's quite a lot of work that we have to get through between now and June. Now, there will be a very wide engagement so that the Taskforce can get behind the drivers and trends in what is becoming an increasingly complex and demanding environment. So consultations with stakeholders across the sector and across Australia will be vital. For example, we intend to undertake quite detailed consultations to capture the views of providers, consumers, their families, workers, volunteers and informal carers across the country, and that'll be taking place in February and in March. The Taskforce is absolutely committed to ensuring that our approach is collaborative and considered, and that means working closely with you. We need to understand the full range of frustrations and opportunities that are present to us in this workforce. Now, why is that important? It's important because long after we've completed our work, the task of implementing it will be yours. So we really need to create a strategy that is executable. And at the end of the day, it's got to be executed by the people in this room. So I don't come here with answers, but rather I come today with an open mind and a desire to discuss the challenges that we're all facing together. I would invite you to treat your interactions with the Taskforce as an opportunity to get your issues and ideas on the table and to make sure that you're heard. What I ultimately want, and this is the challenge I think to each of us, is what I ultimately want is for you to own the workforce strategy as if you wrote it yourself. Now that doesn't mean selling out. What it means is engaging to the point where you do own it, where your issues have been heard, they've been worked through and they've been included in the thinking, because that is the only way that we're going to make a lasting difference. Now, over the last few years, much has been written about the workforce issues within this sector. And in the more recent past, we've seen 4 substantial reviews that have highlighted but not dealt directly with workforce. Now, in many ways, industry and consumer groups are feeling quite fatigued. Everybody feels like they've made their case and they've raised these issues on many occasions. But I'm really standing here today to say that we cannot keep creating new questions to pass on to a new review to resolve. The buck has to stop now. And as an industry-led piece of work around workforce strategy, it really is our responsibility now to answer those questions so that we have a strategy that can we work with and that can evolve over time. So to set the context for the kind of work we're doing, I'm breaking my presentation today into 3 parts. So the first I want to concentrate is on the need for change, and in particular the impact of changing economic, environmental and cultural factors that we should be considering and that we will need to consider in reconceptualising this industry. The second is settling our approach to industry workforce strategy. So I want to share with you at this stage the 5 imperatives, strategic imperatives that we'll be focusing our work around. Now this of course will evolve through the course of this work. And then lastly, to then look at how we best shape the workforce strategy together. For those of you that will be attending the summit on the 4th of December, we will be using that day to explore those imperatives in a great deal of depth. Now, I don't need to tell you that we have, one thing I never do is keep in line with my slides. So if you feel I should have moved on, somebody wave on. I don't need to tell you the kind of challenges that the sector is facing. You're more than well aware of it and you experience it on a day-to-day basis. But let's think about the mindset that is going to have to change in doing this work. The reality is we have a highly fragmented industry. We've got over 3,000 companies involved in this industry. Many of them are small to medium business enterprises. And by international standards, you wouldn't call them small to medium, they're micro enterprises, often without the resources to be able to take on the kinds of initiatives and challenges that we talk so easily about in the larger businesses. We've got to understand that there isn't a shared view of what the problem is that we're trying to solve with respect to ageing and aged care. We don't have an industry-wide workforce strategy at all at the moment. And as I go through the presentation, it'll become pretty clear why that is as it is. And so if we're going to develop a strategy for the industry, then we need to really start to look at the underpins to that industry and some of the fundamental building blocks that need to be put in place. Now, you'd think that in starting to talk about aged care workforce, we'd start by talking about the aged care sector. But often my view is that our conversations are internally focused. And one of the greatest opportunities we have is to start to look outside our industry and understand the context in which we exist. So what I want to do today is start by talking about the future trends around work. and life, coupled with Australia's sort of broader economic challenges and collectively their impact on consumer-centric models of care. So in just over 20 years, we are going to have a doubling in the size of our mature consumer base over 65. Now, in any other industry, that would be seen as a massive opportunity, a doubling. 25% of government expenditure will be spent on that community. More than 50% of people over 70 years old live with disability, and that's increasing. We're living longer, but that line is not moving. So we're living longer with more disability. Even at that age, over 70, you've got 83% of people still living at home, and those numbers are rising sharply. On balance, only about 30% of the community ultimately benefit from welfare. So there's 70% of the community who don't, who aren't supported by this system. These numbers are all increasing at a rate that goes beyond simply the sheer number of consumers entering into this territory, right? And therefore, if we're going to consider this, we have to understand that this brings with it an unprecedented level of social, health and psychological challenges. So we need to reposition our sector to take into account the changing nature of work and the changing nature of life. And in saying this, I reflect upon a book that I would recommend, if you haven't read, that you do, The 100-Year Life, which examines life and living and working in an age of longevity. Now, in it, the author shows how living to 100 will have a profound effect on society and on the economy. So life expectancy is rising, people are not able to self-sustain in retirement, and increasing numbers of people are juggling multiple careers. So for the first time ever, people are living beyond society's abilities to properly care for them. Now, society has a long-term view on developing young people for eventual adult living, with varying stages of education, personal development, industries, a myriad of exciting and inspirational products and services along the way. Industries that have all been built around the notion of growing up. But what if getting older was approached in the same way as preparing for earlier life stages? When you consider the context of the growth in the numbers and the complexity of our ageing population, the manner in which we approach aged care as an industry is critical, and we are positioned better than anybody else to influence the positive outcomes. So we need an industry workforce strategy that reflects these future trends, not just addresses the issues of today, but both recognises the changing nature of work and life as people age and the evolving expectations of consumers. Now, I want to define consumers, though, as individuals, their families, their carers and their community, so that we start to broaden our understanding of who our real consumer is. As Australia's economy rebalances away from the resources boom and mining-led growth, there is a strong growth in service-led industries that will sustain the development of our economy. Now, undoubtedly, the aged care sector plays a pivotal role in our economic prosperity. However, for too long, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, anything remotely encroaching on aged care has been seen as a poor cousin across a range of professions and services in Australia, and indeed in many markets. And it isn't. So let's sort of consider the facts around this. Those aged over 65 are set to become net economic contributors to the community. There's often a myth in the community that this is a group that cost us. This is a group that are genuinely net economic contributors to our community. And over the next 20 years, as that cohort grows, they're set to become the largest economic contributor to this community. In 2014-15, the Aged Care Guild estimated that the aged care sector directly contributed $13 billion to the Australian economy, and a further $4 billion was contributed indirectly through services supporting aged care, such as food, accommodation and medical services. That is a substantial contribution to the economy. So not only is it economically attractive, But the latest ABS workforce data highlights that aged care is now one of the nation's fastest growing job markets. At present, we employ around 366,000 people, which is approximately 3% of the workforce. I can tell you, in chairing the Advanced Manufacturing Council also, if we were getting that kind of growth, we'd be delighted. So that is, something to be looked at positively. The Productivity Commission estimates, and we're all well aware of those reports, that we'll need almost 1 million employees in the industry by 2050. However, interestingly, that estimate does not take into consideration the subsequent reforms such as in-home care, introduction of consumer-directed care, and the growth in the number of home care packages available. So the point there is, it's a massive employment opportunity and a massive economic opportunity, and points to the need for an even more developed, diverse, skilled and engaged workforce. So increasingly aged care will become an important contributor to economic growth, and particularly as the transition moves to a more labour-intensive and technology-supported service sector in Australia. Now, to capitalise on this opportunity, the workforce strategy must address the economic trends to ensure we have a workforce that meets current and emerging future needs. Moreover, we have to shift our mindset from seeing that aged care is a cost to the community to seeing the enormous economic opportunity that it presents if we get it right. Now, recent reforms in the industry roadmap underline the desire as this sector develops to become more consumer-centred. But this has to go way beyond simply giving people the freedom about how they spend their budgets. It's got to be a system focused entirely on the consumer experience, an understanding of the consumer journey as it relates to ageing and to ageing well. It needs to reflect that ageing just doesn't happen when you hit the residential care community. It starts quite some time earlier, and all of the interplays professionally need to be considered. But what does it really mean to put consumers at the heart of your choices and your business decisions? And that is a question that the Taskforce will be addressing. What we do know is that the shift towards a consumer-centric market in aged care is consistent with the consumer dynamics that are affecting most industries. So businesses across different industries are becoming increasingly responsive to consumer preferences, to attract and retain customers, to facilitate those interactions with technology, and to support it with better communication and forward-looking innovation. In that sense, our challenges and our learnings can be picked up from many other parts of industry. As an important part of the Australian economy, moving towards such models in aged care will ensure that the system becomes more flexible and responsive to the changing circumstances in the future. I often think about this from my own family perspective. When I look at I've got 3 young sons, or now adult sons, who are coming through and opening up their careers. And they look at the world quite differently. They're looking at it from a continuous change and a continuous development perspective. And this industry has to get that we in this room are the next range of consumers for our own industry, and they will be following after. It has to be an industry that evolves. The Aged Care Sector Committee's Aged Care Roadmap was released in 2016. Now, from my point of view, it was one of the first examples of an industry-led piece of work that really thought through the challenge and positioned themselves well. We need to see a lot more of that unity and shared thinking and collective resolve developing as an industry. But what it did, it is identified that it was in the industry's interest and in the consumer's interest to encourage competition to drive greater technological innovation within the sector. And in so doing, it identified and calls rightly for a more agile aged care sector with core standards regulated by government. My view has always been, in the large companies that I've managed around the world, is that industry has to work out what it wants. it has to do that based on an understanding, a superior understanding of the consumer needs that they're looking to meet, and then decide what government does where they can't. And so we need to take our cues from that aged care roadmap and start to really lead this industry rather than be led as an industry. Now, as an industry, we do have social responsibility to improve safety and quality of care for all Australians. The expectations of the aged care sector are understandably high because all of us want our family members and ourselves to be treated with nothing but dignity and respect. Now, as an industry, community and government, we all have a social responsibility to continue to improve the quality of care for Australians. We need to rebalance that discussion and make sure that everybody understands their critical role in this and the way they can play a role in helping the workforce do their jobs more effectively. But I think we need to move on from the notion of social responsibility, because social responsibility often in business is the thing that you do to protect and manage reputation. What we need to do is move into line with the sort of more contemporary thinking in business, which is really one of shared value. Now, shared value focuses on the connections between society and your business outcomes. And what is it fundamentally? It's the operating practices and it's the systems that you put in place to enhance your competitiveness as an organisation, while simultaneously advancing the social and economic conditions of the community in which you operate. Having led large business, I know the pressure that boards bring on to reduce costs and to become more and more efficient. But I can tell you, the best companies are focused on growth through innovation and through meeting consumer needs. What we need to focus on in this idea of shared value is that notion of intelligent growth, where we are connecting our businesses more and more into our local communities. Now, as an industry, we need to have that sense of shared value because we want to be an industry that Australians can be proud of. You know, to be proud of and completely at ease and relishing engaging our involvement in caring for their loved ones, and in so doing attract and retain a workforce who have pride in their contribution and importantly are recognised and appropriately rewarded for that contribution. We have to accept that it is possible to be profitable social enterprises that ultimately support economic outcomes as part of a shared value approach in this sector. There's absolutely no reason why this cannot be a profitable sector which delivers against community expectations, consumer needs and government policy requirements if we decide that is our objective. But to do that, industry has to take the lead. We need to bring our businesses and society, our community, together in co-creating these kinds of approaches. And we need to therefore think more broadly about the entire consumer journey and the entire workforce that is involved on the way through that ageing experience. And in particular, we need to consider how different parts of the workforce, such as our health professionals, our ancillary staff, our volunteers, the expectations we have on the input from families, are all involved as multiple touch points on the way through that journey. Now, the disability sector has incrementally shifted its focus to ability. So too, we need to shift our focus and change our conception of care and how we define quality of care. Dignity is about living, not just dying quietly. So leveraging family and community, breaking down the walls that sometimes divide us has to be part of our intent if we are going to have a united approach to this industry workforce strategy. In this sense, I hope that the Taskforce, working together with industry, government, community, can redefine the purpose of the aged care sector to focus on the shared value derived for the consumer by this workforce. But to do it, we need to have a shared belief around ageing and aged care. Now this takes me on to my next point. A skilled and engaged workforce is essential to support quality care and enable continuing reform. Now at its core, this is all about people. And since structure follows strategy, this strategy is really fundamentally all about people. Now, a person's work orientation doesn't necessarily depend upon their profession or the amount of money they make. It's most often about the amount of meaning that they attach to their work. Now, there's a latent desire in all of us to engage in meaningful work. And what can be more meaningful than supporting another human being? So as we watch our population age, as we age broadly as a society, the time is now right to redirect our efforts and prioritise the things that society is depending upon. We need to refocus on the outcomes our workforce delivers to people and communities every day, the contribution each worker makes to the quality of life of other human beings. And given the significance of that role, the significance of the role played by the workforce in delivering aged care services, it's going to be important that both existing employees and future employees entering the aged care sector are equipped with the necessary skills. There's an increasing demand across all industries, but there is an increasing demand for more highly skilled aged care workforce as older Australians enter residential care at later stages and with more complex medical conditions and comorbidity. Advances in medicine, advances in patient care mean that continuous training and skills development are going to be necessary in the aged care workforce. Now these advances mean that in order to provide better consumer experiences and better patient management experiences, then the workforce needs to be able and facilitated in updating their skills on an ongoing basis, particularly in areas where boundaries are often challenged and new areas are being explored, particularly as we're now facing up to managing an ever-increasing number of ageing Australians with cognitive issues. So it's in this context that the workforce will focus on a number of areas. So one will be the supply and retention of the right workers with the right aptitudes and attitudes in the right locations, utilising the concept in this case, and we can talk about it more in the Q&A, of job families to better define current roles, competency requirements, capability gaps, pathways and upskilling opportunities within the sector, and the interplay between the aged care workforce and the primary health workforce. The capacity of providers as employers and the role of sector leadership to equip the workforce to meet service requirements, including a more customer-oriented approach and a better definition around quality of care. Where we need to focus on building sector-wide capabilities to innovate and extend new ways of working that are tailored to meet the needs of older people who use aged care services, their families, their carers and communities, regardless of the setting in which that is delivered. We need to keep bearing in mind that this industry, 3,000 or more companies, from very large to very small, means that we have to be cognizant of how to execute these strategies across the very, very different universe that we support. And then we'll also be looking at issues that affect remuneration commensurate with skills and responsibility. Now, some people would leave this to increasing levels of demand. While we will not be addressing issues directly of remuneration, we will be looking at job comparability and making sure we understand how roles within this sector compare across other sectors in that consumer journey. Now, there are 5 strategic imperatives that I'll zip through that we are going to focus our review on. And use this as a basis to shape and to start to bring our thinking together. Now, these imperatives recognise that while getting the workforce right is one of the pillars of quality care, we are facing a broader issue in the development of the aged care workforce strategy and understanding how to engage the community in understanding and supporting our strategy. So the approach requires us as a sector to challenge and to reframe our thinking when it comes to ageing and aged care. So the first imperative looks at the industry's cultural truth and belonging. As I said earlier, there is no shared industry view around the attitudes towards ageing or aged care. Furthermore, there's a stigma about the aged care industry being the poor cousin to the health sector. And we have to highlight, expose, and dispel these unconscious biasness to define the reality of aged care and the work circumstances and the challenges that are unique to our industry. We have to tell a story as an industry, and it's a story that must be heard if we're going to advance the quality of thought and community engagement around ageing. In order to tell that story, to build this industry narrative, we need to start with a fundamental question, and that question is, why does this industry matter? Having a shared industry view will help to establish key insights, some of the key truths that we deal with on a day-to-day basis, and a proposition of belief that will help us engage the workforce and potential workforce more broadly. This will inform and help us in the development of a vision for the workshop, but importantly, it will stimulate thinking from first principles and sits above workforce issues that have been debated and remained unresolved for a long time. The second imperative looks at industry leadership, mindset and accountability. Now, as I've mentioned, we are an industry that's made up of multiple diverse actors. Now, and of course, in those circumstances, in a highly fragmented industry, we're going to have lots of different points of view. The diversity of views should not be used as an excuse to why the industry strategy can't be developed. What we need to do is to harness that diversity and bring together our differences to enhance our leaders' mindsets as to why this industry matters and why they are in a position to influence it. The Taskforce is absolutely committed to a process of engagement and consultation to hear all the voices in the sector. But fundamentally, my hope is through that process that we'll start to unite those voices, to articulate a story about the importance of the aged care sector now and into the future. Now, to do that, we need the leadership in the sector to be recognised and to step into that challenge. So the Taskforce and the work ahead of us provides a landmark opportunity to achieve what we've all been speaking about for many years as an industry. So we need to transition to a genuine consumer-centred integrated care approach. We need to ensure that strategic workforce plans align to that consumer model. And that it's implementable now and it's sustainable and scalable into the future. It needs to be one where we can evolve our current thinking, where our expectations of government to always resolve our issues for us is dispelled, and we step up and we lead this industry into the huge economic opportunity that it presents while delivering against the social outcomes that we've talked about. Fundamentally though, we need to do it in a way where our employees feel valued and our consumers, their families, their communities feel and recognise that they are at the heart of our work. Now, the Taskforce will achieve this with your support, and it'll do that through a combination of trend analysis. It'll be covering all aspects of health, ageing, intergenerational factors, looking at the world of work and technology's role, how it can play, and it'll be informed by existing national and international research. The third imperative is then about conceiving an industry operating model. Now, we don't have an industry view around managing the workforce, and so we need to now conceive an industry operating model in order to support the development of a strategy. Now, we're not talking about company operating models, but what should the shape of the industry look like to support our businesses and our workforce development? So ultimately the question that we'll be answering is, what is the right operating model to deliver the consumer outcomes and quality care in a sustainable manner? We will clearly define the profile of the types of organisations providing services to the industry, and in so doing, the manner in which they currently engage and provide services. And this will be closely linked to understanding the roles, the competencies, the capability frameworks that will be useful in each business to help them better approach the challenge of retaining and attracting the kind of talent that we need to develop this business into the future. The Taskforce will work with leaders across the sector to ensure that all voices are equal to unite us in building, shaping and sustaining a new industry model and view. If we are going to talk about integrated care, then our strategy has to be an integrated strategy, and that means we do need to hear the views of other participants across the workforce. The fourth imperative focuses on industry attraction and retention. So this includes a skilled and industry recognised workforce, clear and attractive career progression, levels and pathways, targeted and differentiated approaches to regional, rural and remote locations. Based on the direction of industry operating model, this will help in working out where the different issues are across each of the different sectors, whether it be geographic or consumer focus, that need to be taken into consideration in developing much more targeted attraction and retention strategies, and importantly, where real support is required to close capability and resourcing gaps. The fifth imperative examines how existing and proposed research can be more readily applied to the industry-focused models of care. Now, there's a substantial amount of government investment that goes into primary research, and a very large amount that goes into primary medical research. Something in the order of about $8 billion a year go into research in Australia. But very little of that is going into new models of care and the translation of that thinking into practice. I'll share a little anecdote from my experience as chair of the National Breast Cancer Foundation Council. And some work that we did a number of years ago indicated that the time taken from primary research to execution in the field was around 17 years. In a rapidly evolving industry that relies very much on the development of primary health and translation into new models and new thinking around capability and lifestyle expectations, we need to rapidly reduce those kinds of implementation times. Now, we recognise that there is not going to be one model that is right for every business or every part of industry, but what we do need to make sure that right across our businesses and right across our geography, that there is enough research and evidence to support the decisions that you want to take, to know that they are going to add value and create that kind of shared value opportunity as technology and models of thought evolve. So application of that research, therefore, does need to consider the industry's future, and this can provide, if done well, the ongoing feed, if you like, to thinking around how the strategy evolves in time. So, in thinking about the role that we now play, these are the three questions that I'd like us to spend a little bit of time on in our Q&A. But broadly speaking, the questions that Kate has pulled together for the day go into these in a lot more depth. So we will get through it through the course of the day. But I'm mindful that I want you to really see these next few months, even though there might be a demand on your time on you from a time perspective. It really is more than just an academic exercise. This is an opportunity for us to now build a workforce strategy on solid foundations, on some good fundamental industry thinking applied from others into our industry, an opportunity to get all issues back on the table and make sure they get addressed, but importantly, that when we finish this work, there are no unanswered questions, that we are happy to move on with our workforce strategy and then take the learnings and develop it as we proceed. There simply will not be time for people in the process who simply want to keep raising issues and who are not interested in solving them. Now is the time for action. Now is the time for ideas to be put on the table, and the door is completely open for us to do this work for ourselves. So in closing, I just want to reiterate a couple of final points. So as a growing industry, with human services broadly in Australia being the go-to place for employment, we have an opportunity to shape the future for the better. We are an industry that is made up of multiple diverse actors and do have different points of view, but we do need to come together. We have to listen to each other, but ultimately coming together is the only route to the success of this workforce strategy. To do so, we have to be prepared to face up to our fears. We have to be prepared to face up to our frustrations, but we also have to be prepared to put our desires on the table and make sure that we don't leave anything unexpressed. To build this industry strategy, we need to start from the position of understanding why this industry matters and create a shared belief for our workforce about why they are taking it on and why they are committing to belong to this sector. And in doing that, we will as an industry have to step up and face up to the unconscious biases and some of the stigma that exists around the industry and take it head on with an appropriate narrative that brings the community together in creating solutions to some of these challenges. The Taskforce absolutely committed to a process of engagement and consultation. As I've said, that is a way in which we can bring people together, but that kind of consultation needs to become a collaborative approach, a co-working approach that continues into the future. So it's a landmark opportunity. We get to do it, and we get to do it well, and I'm absolutely determined to ensure that we do that. But I will reiterate, all voices are equally important. Even the most difficult voices need to be heard, and in my experience, they usually are absolutely loaded with insight if we're prepared to stop and listen and set aside emotional differences and set aside style differences and just listen to the content of what people are saying. But importantly, we have to go back and understand what consumers want and what they need and build our businesses collectively around those outcomes. So I thank you for taking the time to listen. I'm very delighted to be spending the day with you today and happy to open it up to any questions if we've got some time.
Yeah, we do. Thank you. Please join me in thanking John.